Mini episode 348 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.info.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
I want to welcome everybody to FDH Lounge, mini episode number 348, with a really outstanding MMA fighter and author. I want to give a shout out to somebody who I had hoped could join us for the interview today to help me conduct it, but somebody who has been very, very good at briefing me on a lot of things MMA over the years. My good friend, MMA ring announcer Jake Digman, and it's a lot of conversations with him that have helped get me ready for conversations such as this and teach me a little bit more about the MMA world. So tip of the hat to him for some of the things that he has done to prepare me for conversations such as this. Notable also that the brother of the gentleman that we're speaking with today, Ken Shamrock, joined us for FDH Lounge mini episode number 26, and I would urge folks to go back in the archives and check that out as well. We did that one back in October of 2011. But again, the gentleman we have today is the author of a really incredible book. I really didn't know what to expect when I got it, didn't know if it was going to be more of a straightforward recitation of his history, as a lot of books that we feature sometimes are, but it was incredibly inspirational because he had the honesty to put everything out there and to talk about what all of the challenges were that encompassed his life story. That's something that would be beyond the capacity of a lot of folks to be able to do. But I really take my hat off to him because I think this is something that is going to benefit a lot of folks to read that and hopefully to help make them make it through similar circumstances if there is anybody who is suffering as he did in his childhood. But he is, again, the author of an incredible new book, Uncaged, My Life as a Champion MMA Fighter. We're very proud to welcome to the FDH Lounge the aforementioned champion MMA fighter, Frank Shamrock. Frank, welcome to the program today, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's so good to be able to talk to you and to be able to dive into the life story here that you chronicle in the book. It's a very inspirational one. We've got a good friend of the show who wrote a book who it actually reminded me a lot of his book, Vernon Turner, former NFL player, and he had gone through a lot of tough times in his childhood. And when I say tough times, I'm really kind of underselling it. But again, it was a very interesting kind of balance that I suppose you have to go through to write a book like this. We explored it a little bit with him. I'd like to explore it with you as far as how you weigh when you're going to do something like this, what's therapeutic, what's helpful to kind of put out there, how you can help other people by telling your story versus really what's just too raw and painful for you to delve into. How do you solve that in your mind?
Well, it's a delicate dance between your consciousness and the publisher and your editor. Because, I certainly had a story that I wanted to tell, but the publisher, had an idea as well, but, the story should be. But I think the best part is the story is undeniable. It's the story of my life, and it was not only incredibly challenging, but I was able to overcome those things. And, like you were saying, the book started out just being sort of, a recollection and accounting thereof. But as the journey continued, it really turned into, that book I always wanted to pick up when I was a kid, and that was, just something inspiring that at the end of the day says, hey, you're probably going to make it if you keep trying.
Well, I feel like it really accomplished that. I think a lot of people who read the book would agree with that. I'm really struck as I'm reading it, as I'm going through, somebody who worked in the same line of business as your brother Ken did at one point, Dusty Rhodes, that old quote about I wine and dine with kings and queens and slept in alleys and eaten pork and beans. I mean, you've had higher highs and lower lows in your life than a lot of people. When you look at the fame and the money and the attention on the one hand and the childhood abuse and how it led probably a straight line to the alcoholism subsequently, was it worth it in your mind? If you could have done it over, would you have lived more of a normal life if you could have had control over that and not had the highs and the lows, or was it worth it in your mind in the end to have experienced both extremes?
You know, I don't know another life, so I can't say otherwise. But I can certainly say the things that I went through and the things that I had to persevere and the challenges that I accepted certainly made me who I am. So I can't see changing my course as tough as it was and as hard as each lesson was to learn. I wouldn't know what else to do.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because, as you said, it really did kind of shape you. And before we start to get into a little bit of the MMA, since I touched on briefly with your brother Ken and with his other career, I'm curious to know, because a guy like you would have been a tremendous candidate with everything that you did to have also gone and pursued pro wrestling as your brother did. He was really tremendous, I thought, the brief time that he was at it. Not just because you're Ken Shamrock's brother, you would have had a good shot at it. Obviously, in many cases, pro wrestling promotions have snapped up big-time MMA guys. You certainly qualify in that regard. You showed with the Phil Baroni fight there that you were capable of doing the kind of pro wrestling build to a fight there, the way that you guys did that. And, of course, your attorney, Henry Holmes, repping Hulk Hogan and Bill Goldberg. You had every opportunity in the world that was right there. What were your thoughts on that as far as not pursuing that as at least a sidelight?
I came into combat sports from a different avenue. So, I saw my body as having a very limited lifespan. And once I was into the fighting world, I never really trusted anybody else with my body after that point except for myself. Professional wrestling is a very hard contact sport. And the difference between real fighting and professional wrestling is in real fighting, I have 100% control. And if someone, breaks me, it's because, I was not on my game. In professional wrestling, to make the show happen, you have to give your body to somebody else at times and trust them inexplicably. And I couldn't do that. It didn't work for me. And so I never tried.
Great points there, certainly, because when you're looking at the night after night taking bumps on the road and, as you said, putting your fate in somebody else's hands, and accidents do happen, unfortunately. So that's a very good point there. But as you look at it, again, unlike your brother, you stayed pretty much with MMA all the way through, didn't do the sidelight into pro wrestling. And as we start to get into a little bit of your career, what would you say in terms of an overview in the eyes of history? And we'll get into the politics of what makes somebody a Hall of Famer or not. In the eyes of the people, certainly you're a Hall of Famer, even if you're not in the UFC Hall of Fame. That would, I think, be a consensus. But going beyond that, I mean, do you think you were on the first tier of fighters all time, or have you kind of worked that out in your mind of where exactly you kind of fit into the pantheon?
No, I mean, I don't know, about any Hall of Fames or anything. I know that when I was in the sport, I did everything I could for the success of the sport, both in the cage, ring, and out of it. So I don't really know what constitutes what. I'm certainly one of the most decorated and celebrated athletes that's ever been there, and I set a bunch of crazy world records. But, I mean, the thing I know about fighting is that one day you are the greatest fighter in the world, and then, a week later you're not, because there's some other guy who's in the gym training and who's in shape and ready to fight when you're taking a week off. So it's just one of those games where, my goal was to be the greatest fighter in the world. I did it. I was the greatest of all time for a minute, and then the sport evolved and time moved on.
Absolutely, and you did attain certainly that level of accomplishment right there, which very few can ever say as far as being the best at one time. And subsequently, again, this all began with your stay when you ended up in the home that Bob Shamrock was running prior to, of course, getting adopted by him. And the book goes into, I think, tremendous detail on that and tells great stories. And certainly, as was the case with Ken, you had your ups and downs over the years with Bob. And it was a thing where I got the sense as I read it, as I went through, and there were some instances in there of difficulty, as well as instances where it was apparent just how much he meant to you and just how much he was a part of your success. Ultimately, the part about having stayed away from his funeral, I found it to be understandable reading it in that you were doing what you thought was respectful at the time. Are you getting that sense from people as they've read the book, as they've digested your point of view? of a little bit better understanding of, hey, I might not agree with Frank on this, but if he thought he was doing the respectful thing, that's okay?
Honestly, it seems to be split down the center. Some people are very polarized to the fact that they don't understand it, and then some people are, very energized by the fact that, they made some decisions or, it was necessary in their life to do similar things, and, it was all right. So, yeah, it seems to be down the center, though. I get both sides. I've come to terms with it. It was a conscious decision that I made. It was a very emotional decision, and, my dad, of all things, taught me to always try to do what's right first. And so I did what was right, and, it is what it is.
Sure. You were pursuing that as far as what you perceived to be the right thing in that moment. You touched also, too, in terms of the relationship that you had with Ken, and I thought this was a very interesting point in the book as far as how you viewed him at various points in time. And there was one point in time when things were not very great between you guys, and you referred to him as, yes, okay, he's my brother. Technically, we were adopted by the same guy, but that's not exactly the same thing as being blood relatives. And I look at this and I think here about the Williams sisters or the Klitschkos or other famous siblings in other sports. The fact that you two were brought together the way that you were, how does that account for some of the differences in terms of how you guys have interacted over the years as opposed to people who are blood siblings?
Well, I think I think we lack that baseline of, playing together when you're little kids and, saving each other from, emergencies and stuff like that. We became brothers, much later in life and under, just different circumstances. So, I always accepted Ken as a brother because my life was sort of a patchwork of families, whoever, would help raise and, be kind and stuff. So it wasn't that abnormal to me. But, as the years went on and as we got further separated, then it became even more abnormal and uncomfortable. And I think, that's why it was so important that we, try to do something about it.
Oh, exactly. And it's very good. I think a lot of people would say very heartening that you guys have come to a much better understanding over a period of time. And that Spike TV special really kind of underscored that. It's really kind of interesting, as I touched on Ken's other career previously about pro wrestling, that he was around for a period of time there, probably the most famous brother feud in the history of the business. He was good friends with those guys, Bret Hart and the late, great Owen Hart. It's a different thing, of course, altogether in combat sports. If you promote it the same way, brother versus brother, you have the same kind of intrigue, but again, in a non-worked sport, that's a different matter. So you guys, I think, quite wisely stayed away from that over a period of time, certainly when you guys were in your primes, and the fact that you guys weren't on the best of terms for a lot of that period of time probably had a lot to do with not making it happen also. With the TV show, when you guys sat down, Ken now expressing an interest in doing it, but you pointed out in the book that, again, Ken's record on the back end of his career as opposed to where he was earlier, it would seem to be very ill-advised from his perspective. I know Dave Meltzer agrees with that point of view, and that Ken, at his age and with the damage he's taken already, should not be getting into such a fight. I know you said you're doing it for your own reasons, and that's smart. That's always a good thing. But is there also another reason in the back of your head of, maybe at one point in time when I was mad at him, I might have fantasized about being able to do damage, but now that I might be in a position to do that, I could never live with myself?
No, I could totally live with myself if I did that. I would be just, oddly enough, I would be just fine with it. When the whole fighting thing came about, it just came from a weird place because we were in a weird, we were displaced in our relationship. So, when I came up with the idea, which was, to me, just another business idea, the intention was I wanted to kick his ass. I wanted to, pay him back. In a negative way. But as I started working on it and as I had to, even humble myself and sit before him and pitch him on a business proposal where I was fighting him, it just took on a different meaning for me. And at the end of the day, the reason why I pursued it is, this was something I could do for Ken, at a level where, he wouldn't have to work anymore. His family would be cared for. And he gave me this gift that's greater than anything else that anyone's ever given me in my life. And as much as I think he's a knucklehead and sometimes I want to beat him up, I owe him tremendously for that. And if I can pay him back in any way, I will do that. And this was how this thing ended up. I was like, wow, we should fight, because that will take care of a lot of problems, concerns, needs, and futures. And unfortunately, it fell apart. But, for a minute there, it was all working.
Well, there are just some really, really fascinating and complicated nuances, even to this day, it sounds like, in the relationship between you guys. And the book does a tremendous job of exploring that as well. And we've talked a little bit about the notions of coming to terms with things in life. What that takes me to is the most recent UFC show, the 20th anniversary show. A little bit of kind of bubblings coming out of that when you look at Dana White speaking to some of the legends backstage, maybe a little bit of renewed appreciation for the people who were some of the forefathers of UFC. That's what's been reported in recent days here. Do you get the sense that there could be ever any kind of an ice thaw between UFC and folks like yourself who are on the outside looking in, who are not properly appreciated for what you've put into the sport? It would seem like, at a bare minimum, it's bad business for them not to be publicly recognizing the legends who they are on bad terms with. So do you foresee any kind of thawing of the ice between yourself, Dana White, and the other folks in the organization potentially?
I don't foresee any of that. They make their point very clear. If you're not with them, you're their enemy, and they go after you. So, the problem with a lot of guys is they've either ended up on the wrong side of a relationship, or they've spoken up in a truthful situation, that may have not been the most positive light on the UFC, and they end up being exercised. So I don't think there's anything that can be done, because I've never done anything but try to support the sport, be an honest, good person, and, try to give back to the sport that helped, me be successful.
Well, all that is true, and I know that everybody who really has supported your career and believes in you hopes that will be enough at some point here to get you the kind of historical recognition from them that you deserve, and being welcomed back into the family there. But another thing I'd like to ask you about going forward, and I know that you're probably still sort of at the infancy of dealing with this and thinking through the implications of it, but everything that was uncovered in the course of writing your book that you detail as far as the depths of some of the childhood abuse that you went through and things of that nature. Obviously, anybody can tell from reading the book that you're a very caring person, and that you would be foursquare against these kinds of things happening even if they hadn't happened to you. Do you have any kind of a sense yet as far as how you fit into the picture going forward as somebody who is now probably one of the most prominent folks in America who is a survivor of childhood abuse? Do you have any kind of a sense of how you can really tangibly make a difference going forward?
Well, I think still just speaking up is the hardest thing for most people right now. I think that, much like, and probably, even more so than mental illness, abuse and sexual abuse is just so, not, cool to talk about. So it's just, I applaud people that step forward and try to make a change to it. And for me, it's something I want, I'm always going to keep trying to help protect children and make a change, because, that sucks that happens to people. And a lot of times it happens to people because nobody says anything.
Absolutely. And it's, again, very, very, very commendable that you have put yourself out there in this way and able to serve as a positive example for folks who are dealing with issues like this. And again, that and all the other things we talked about here are showcased so well in this outstanding book, Uncaged: My Life as a Champion MMA Fighter. Frank, is there anything we didn't hit sufficiently in the course of our conversation that we should have? Anything else that you've got going on that you'd like to talk about?
No, I do have a new television career which I'm launching myself into, but I have 2 shows done and 1 more I'm starting on. But yeah, just maybe wish me luck, I guess. I don't know. It's a new career, so I'm pretty excited about it, but I'm very nervous at the same time.
Well, anybody that's checked you out doing MMA commentary in the past knows how very good you are at projecting yourself on camera and getting across the points that need to be covered. So I'm sure everything will go very well with that. Frank, it was tremendous to be able to have you on the program. We look forward to keeping up with everything that's going forward with your career from this point on. We love to have you back on the show sometime, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in, everybody. FDH Lounge mini episode number 348.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.